have a scene for you to imagine. And it starts with you facing the east, and you're somewhere on the northeast coast of Scotland. And it's a monochrome evening. The world is grey and black, with the last of the light just reflecting on the gentle swell in the harbour in front of you. And it's a big harbour, but it's quite empty. And you're sheltered, but there's a gentle drizzle happening all over around you. But you're underneath this very big wooden stern of a very big fishing vessel. And she's maybe about 70 or 80 feet. She looks quite magnificent from where you are, but she doesn't look at all ready to go back to sea.
You begin to get the impression that this vessel is out of the water for a reason. Her wheelhouse is gone, her oak beams twisted, some removed, others snapped, splinters abound. Above the hull of this vessel, the large, terrifying mechanical arms of excavators lie waiting for the next morning's work, to finish the job, to condemn this once beautiful vessel.
So now you've got that monochrome, slightly bleak image in your head. Hold on to it, and we're going to go back into the past, but come back to this image later. So we're going to go up to Fraserburgh in the late 1930s, at a time when mainly engined boats were being built. The northeast fisheries were still very active. Each harbour still had many of its own smaller fishing vessels for fishing families, and on the west coast fishing vessels for crofting families, so a bit more like supplementary to the rest of an income.
Also, like more contextually, the sort of industrial layout of the country was really geared towards all kinds of homebred industry at this point, so the rail network is as large as it was ever going to be. At this time you had 4 main rail companies competing against each other, so there was real competition. So between firstly the fish markets and the fish markets of the rail companies to get contracts, so there was a huge amount of like sort of chasing wealth, especially after the sort of Wall Street crash in the early 30s. This was a period of rebound and beginning growth again after that austerity. Unfortunately, as you may have twigged already, 1939 was a pretty dramatic year in European history, with the commencement of the Second World War. So sort of the economy took almost sort of a backseat to what was going on.
Yeah. And with all the industrialisation, obviously the boats were changing too. The age of sail was giving way to an age of steam, and at this point giving way to an age of the fossil fuels that we still use now, so petrol and diesel.
Definitely. And yeah, there was still boats around, but they were becoming rarer and rarer, and all the new boats that were being commissioned at this point would have been mostly diesel. You might have had 1 or 2 of the later iterations of steam drifters, but they were pretty uneconomical by this point. And diesel engines were refined. They could be quite small, which would take up less space on your boat, more space for fish. So yeah, we're in Fraserburgh. It's 1939. Fraserburgh's a big fishing town, with several large yards that were making boats. And one of the boats to slip into the waters in Fraserburgh Harbour was called Dundarg. Dundarg, if anybody knows the sort of northeast geography, is a castle, Dundarg Castle, which is also a headland which sticks out near New Aberdour. So
maybe something used in navigation So often boats were actually named after points on the shore that fishermen could look to for their safety. So one example would be Mooring Ep.5, which is the name of a hill in the south of the Hebrides that could be seen from quite far away, and then became the name of a very magnificent boat to be sailing over there. So could have been a similar gig over here.
Definitely.
And then what did she do? 1939.
So, yeah, 1939.
Many options for a boat.
Yeah, so not entirely sure exactly when it happened, but pretty shortly after the boat was launched, she was requisitioned by the Admiralty. The Admiralty is the governing body of the Royal Navy. It's the higher-ups, so to speak, and sit in a big office in Whitehall and make decisions about what happens in the defence of Britain on the seas. So in 1939, they were aware that they were about to get embroiled in a very major conflict, so they requisitioned hundreds of trawlers up and down the whole coast of the UK.
Yeah.
And Dundar, being a brand new, pretty well equipped diesel trawler, was a prime candidate for requisitioning.
And so what happened to the person who had commissioned the boat, or the skipper?
Tough luck. I mean, they would have been given a sort of, it wasn't so much a deposit, but you get a payoff for your boat being requisitioned.
So you weren't just retrained and given a new task?
So quite often the crew would go with the boat.
Yeah, okay.
So they would be enlisted into the Royal Naval Reserves, the R&R. They'd be given some very, very basic training, sometimes as little as 2 or 3 weeks, especially the beginning of the war. That did improve as the war went on. But it would be stuff like how to man a gun, because these trawlers would have been fitted out with a couple of small pom-poms, machine guns, as well as having an armoury of sort of light arms as well for the men. So how to defend the vessel. They would have also been trained in certain tactics depending on what that vessel was going to be used for. So a large number of trawlers became minesweepers. It's a very specialised task. Yeah. And in both wars, the trawler men were used very extensively to sweep mines across Europe, and they became very proficient at it.
And I feel like smacks in the south.
Yes,
used for this.
Absolutely, especially in the south of England with the continent being so close, and in the English Channel, which was an area of sea that was constantly mined by both sides, having a clear passage to navigate as either a Royal Navy or Merchant Navy vessel was really important. So the work that these men did was invaluable to keeping Britain ticking at the time.
And were many men lost in that process?
Hundreds, unfortunately. It was minesweeping is a very dangerous task, as you can imagine. Yeah. But one of the reasons why trawlers were so good at it was because they were small boats with such shallow drafts. So it would be quite often that mines would only be triggered by, this is very nerdy and getting way too much into specifics, but a lot of mines are magnetic contact. So if you imagine a mine being like a really spiky horse chestnut before the conker comes out, it's got little spikes all over the outside of a ball. Yeah. Whenever each one of those contacts touches something metal, it triggers the fuse, which will then cause the explosion. So if you've got an oak-built trawler or a wooden-built trawler that's really small and has a very shallow draft, it's possible you might go over the mine, or even if you hit the mine, it might not trigger. So
I see.
Wooden hulled vessels were, in that case, actually really useful, and actually minesweepers today are often made out of wrong material, GRP, fiberglass, because it's not magnetic.
Not as reactive.
So anyway, huge tangent.
But that is what made this boat pretty well made for a very new task.
But Dundar wasn't a minesweeper.
No.
Dundar was a boom defence vessel.
Okay.
This is turning into the naval history talk, but
it's great.
So Dundar was sent to the west coast, probably after she received some modifications, and as a boom defence vessel, she would have been responsible for maintaining a boom, which is a series of nets and buoys that would be strung out across a bay or a lock or a harbour, and it's to prevent submarines or enemy warships from being able to access that bay or harbour. So it's really important to protect whatever you want to use that anchorage. So in the case of Dundar, she was sent to Albert on Andorra at different times throughout the war. Yeah. And she would have helped repair the boom also sort of act as almost like a tender to that. So basically, whenever the fleet was coming in, they would have needed to open that boom like a gate, like a door, and then close it again. And Loch Awe and a lot of the sea lochs in that part of Scotland were used as gathering points for convoys throughout the Second World War. A lot of which went to America or were arrived from America before then splitting up across Europe. But more commonly, they were used as meeting points for the Arctic convoys that went to Russia. So they went via Iceland and then through what's now known as the Greenland-Iceland UK Gap, which is this really important stretch of water, past the north of Norway and then round to the northern ports in Russia to help the Russian war effort at the time, which was really struggling. So,
do you want to just describe where Loch Awe is for?
Yeah, so it's in the northwest of Scotland, so it's a very, very remote part of the country. There's maybe 2 or 3 settlements of over 500 people in the area. I mean, Ullapool's not too far away, but it's still a good hour's drive from there. And the remoteness was a big benefit to the Navy. You know, it's easy to protect somewhere where there's not a lot of people. So you don't have NIMBYs in your backyard that are getting grumpy because there's Luftwaffe pilots trying to bomb your cargo vessels in the loch. So
on the other hand, there are fewer people to see an enemy arrive.
This is very true, and we could get into the Home Guards string of defensive fortifications all along the west coast because they were very extensive, and a lot of them still remain if you ever want to go and poke around. Loch Ewe in particular, there's some really well preserved gun emplacements. There's also a museum, the Museum of the Arctic Convoys. Highly recommend it, run by volunteers. If you want to learn more about the Arctic Convoys, learn more about the Royal Navy's presence in the northwest, and about boats like Dundarg's war career, please go and have a chat with them. So I'm going to stop talking about the war now.
No, going back. So where was that that people should go?
So that's in Pool U, which is at the bottom of Loch Ewe.
And what's the name of the place? Is there a visitor centre?
It's just called the Arctic Convoy Museum, I
Amazing.
think. And I'll put the link in the show notes if I can remember.
Okay.
But I'm going to stop now talking about the war because that's not what we're really here to talk about.
But it's a small part of Dundarg's life was this, and she survived.
Yeah, she survived, and then returned to the east coast, where she resumed her career as a fishing boat.
And based in Fraserburgh.
Based in Fraserburgh, I believe it's a little bit patchy, and I haven't had a chance to look through the Mariner's Almanacs to see if there was maybe some registration changes. But we know that she retained her name. Which is quite interesting. Some boats went through dozens of names, but
even though it's supposed to be bad luck to change your name,
still happened quite a lot.
I know.
I mean, sometimes you wonder if these trawlmen brought it on themselves, but maybe that's too dark to say. I don't know.
So Dundarg was Dundarg for her whole life, and after Fraserburgh, or when did she move from Fraserburgh?
So she was in Fraserburgh, I think, until about the 1980s. And by that time, the fishing industry in Scotland had radically changed. And the type of fishing that was conducted had radically changed. So we spoke a little bit about how she was a ring netter. That type of fishing had kind of gone out the window a little bit in the years since. And there was different types of trawling that had become more efficient, more economical, bigger boats with smaller crews, more automated. This is still a wooden boat. By that point, you were getting like up to 150 foot factory trawlers that could do all the refrigeration on board. So to think that this boat was still operating at that time is a sort of interesting crossover of different generations of fishing. So after she was retired as a trawler, she became a dive support vessel. I'm not sure where that was out of, but it was somewhere on the northeast coast. And so you could charter her to go dive a wreck or dive a site.
Wow.
So that was her career for a couple of years.
And was that a sort of small private enterprise?
I believe so. I haven't been able to find out a huge amount about that, but I think that was just like a sort of a boat for hire type thing. Where, this was a boat that was equipped to dive off. So she served in that capacity, I believe, until 2006 or so, and then she was bought and became a privately owned sort of pleasure or leisure craft, as a lot of trawlers of that generation sort of did. There's quite a few
They all became pleasure craft, but it's sort of type 3 fun of some kind, where you're struggling to get something that feels meaningful from a boat that is amazing but very difficult to get out and to keep going.
Yeah, and I mean, you might be contending with a diesel engine that's 60, 70 years old by this point.
Yeah.
And it's not cheap to keep a boat like that going.
No, it's not like, being on a nice, easygoing, recently made yacht, swanning around.
No.
The Mediterranean.
So we're entering the sort of last chapter of Dundark's, or second last chapter of Dundark's story now. And she was bought by her final owner in 2016. And she was kept for quite a while in Eyemouth, which is along the coast from Musselburgh and Edinburgh, sort of towards Berwick-upon-Tweed, if you know your geography, towards the Scottish-English border. Mm. And she was kept there, just left in the harbour for a number of years until she was relocated back to the northeast to Arbroath, I believe in 2022.
Okay, and so is this the kind of normal trajectory of boats from that time and of that age? I feel like we haven't seen so many boats last that long. How long? We've covered about 80 years now.
Yeah, so most boats, around about the time that I spoke about the change of career for Dundark, most boats just would have been scrapped in the 1980s.
I see, yeah.
A lot of fisher families would have either bought out of the fishing industry because they've had enough, because they've suffered 3 years of lesser returns for their fish through government policy, through changes in the economic environment globally.
Through changes in the fishing environment, so the introduction of bottom trawling, which was actually not legal for about 100 years and then reintroduced in the 80s.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And all of these factors compounded that a lot of these boats, although they probably still had some life in them, and I mean we've spoken about boats previously that have had careers in fishing that have lasted much longer than this, but it meant that you had a lot of boats that were just sold, scrapped, whatever. So quite a lot of boats became dive boats. Quite a lot of trawlers of that generation were requisitioned as offshore supply vessels, or patrol vessels more likely, so they would stand off an oil rig as like a rescue vessel. Yeah. A lot of fishermen became their role as well, so the crew would diversify that way.
Totally.
Just as a way of making a living.
It's quite a common migration in the northeast to go from the fishing towards the oil industry.
Absolutely.
Simply because it's financially viable too.
Definitely. And I think you need that flexibility to change with the times, and if you do want to make a good living, to realise when it's time to get out. Yeah,
or when to shift what your boat's doing. Mm-hmm. And so Eyemouth itself is also a well-known fishing community, but it doesn't seem like she went there for anything related to that.
No, I'm not sure why she ended up in Eyemouth. It's a sizable harbour. It's a beautiful little village with a very storied history of fishing for hundreds of years. So there would have been boats like Dundark fishing out of Eyemouth at the same time that she was fishing out of Fraserburgh. But she would have been an oddity in the harbour at that time. There wouldn't have been many other boats that would have looked like her, like a traditional wooden hulled former fishing boat. It would have all been yachts.
No, but it is, I mean, Eyemouth it's still got an active herring festival, I think, with a herring queen in the summer gala. So it's still a town it's got a sort of dark disaster in its history too, but it's still got this active fishing heritage and probably sympathy.
Definitely.
Toward a boat that reminds it of its past. Mm-hmm. So she'd have been a relevant part of the harbour and the scenery there for the historic environment.
Yeah, for sure.
So then this boat came up to Arbroath.
Yep.
And this is where the image is that we showed you at the very beginning when we described a harbour with a grey scene on a monochrome evening. And this boat does actually exist and is actually there and is actually being broken up.
Yeah. It's difficult to believe based on what we've just told you about this storied history, this 3 or 4 different career-long vessel. That was a trawler, it was a warship, it was a dive support vessel, it was a pleasure vessel, and finally it was a wreck on a quayside in Arbroath.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to sort of get your head around.
It's especially difficult for me because I know that actually at this point she's quite a rare vessel. So not many like her are still on the go. And so who's made the decision to destroy her?
It's quite a complicated image. The decision solely rests on the shoulders of Angus Council. Angus Council's Harbour Board, more specifically, which is a committee of elected councillors and officers who would have met to discuss issues pertaining to the harbours which Angus Council maintained and monitored, which obviously includes Arbroath. And they reached a decision where they felt like they had to give the owner of the vessel an ultimatum, that the vessel had been sat for a number of years without, in their eyes, due diligence or maintenance. It had been accruing harbour fees during that time, which were unpaid.
Yeah.
So they reached a decision that they would give the owner, I think it was 2 months, to acknowledge and work together with them to create a plan for this vessel. If that wasn't carried out, then the vessel would be destroyed. And unfortunately, it came to that in the end, and the vessel has now been destroyed.
Yeah. And so it sounds like they gave the owner opportunity to be part of the onward decision making. It sounds like they were taking some responsibility in offering the option that she's scrapped or broken up. Or,
yeah.
And what other options were on the table?
It
sounds like they weren't all proposed, but there are other options for a boat in that position.
So there wasn't really an option. It was in this case. But if you look at how other vessels that we have in Scotland of a similar vintage or older, their stories has often reached a point that's been similar to this, where maybe the boat's been neglected somewhat, but then an organisation has stepped in to take on the responsibility of the vessel and restoring it and maybe preserving it as a museum or as a sailing example of something that's rare. In this case, that wasn't on the table at all. It was never discussed, as far as we're aware, that the vessel could be perhaps sold to a charitable organisation, maybe for a minimal fund or given away.
Or even to a private owner who was more interested or proactive
definitely
in that moment.
So, it feels like a real loss of a pretty rare type of vessel, of which there's probably less than a handful of examples left in Scotland. Yeah,
and a loss of those sort of end-of-life opportunities, which tend to be abundant for people who want to learn or pull apart a boat or reconstruct it or tell the history of it. And also a loss to the historic environment of Arbroath Harbour. So Arbroath itself, from my understanding, is only as big as it is due to the expansion of the fishing industry.
Absolutely.
And the harbour itself is enormous.
It's very large, yeah. It's painfully empty at the moment. There really is very little in Arbroath Harbour anymore. It does feel like a missed opportunity to have a centrepiece of some kind of movement towards maritime heritage in that town. If you look at what other towns have done, I mean, even like, so Burghead is an example that springs to mind. They had a trawler that was sat in Burghead Harbour for a number of years that was owned, I think it was owned by an individual who passed. The community then took it on. They lifted the boat out of the water, and yes, the boat is currently rotting at the end of the headland in Burghead with a small plaque.
Yeah.
But it's the community's responsibility.
Yeah.
It's in the hands of the community.
Yeah.
So if they want to preserve it, if they want to invest money in it, which, I mean, nobody has any money at the moment, but if they did, then they could. And so that's been saved now for at least a while for future people to come along and say. So even if there had been an opportunity for Dundalk to be pulled out and put in a warehouse or shoved around the back of a yard, at least so it was maybe under some tarp. And then in 10 years, when there's the drive or money, then
Yeah.
maybe something could be done.
Yeah. And then, even if you're not going to save her, to entirely destroy her, when we've got a scarcity of oak and good hardwood timber, well, it sounds like there wasn't an assessment made on what could be repurposed, but maybe there was.
I'm not sure.
So I guess what I'm taking from this right now is a private owner has a hell of a lot of responsibility in owning a big vessel, and that's quite difficult to give justice to. But councils aren't necessarily the best informed either to take a decision or to do what they want with a boat. But what we do see is this sort of amazing in-between where we see private organisations or collectives or groups of volunteers really giving boats huge amounts of justice and knowledge and care and skill in their work towards the boat.
Absolutely.
Are there examples in your head that come to mind?
There's dozens, to be honest. I think if you look at because of the way that the way that maritime heritage works in the UK is really, it's quite poorly funded by government.
Yeah.
So these organisations exist up and down the country. So great examples would be, Barnabas in Cornwall.
Yeah.
To name one. You could talk about the work the Scottish Fishery Museum do. That's slightly different because it's a larger organisation, but the way that they preserve their vessels. You could talk about even, and it's not just, sometimes it's a private owner who feels passionately. So there's a number of like
on Tanera on the west coast. So someone funding the restoration of 2 herring fishing vessels.
And even, in Tanera, you could argue that was a business decision to preserve those vessels. Like that's for a multi-million pound in like hotel complex, that those vessels were kind of a showpiece of that. But hell, who cares? The money was there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it'd be great if government and council would chuck money at organisations to help preserve maritime heritage in the UK, but it's not really ever happened, and I don't think it ever will. So we rely on these small, often under-heralded or unheralded organisations. Like if you go to most towns, villages along the coast of Scotland, there will be some kind of heritage centre, museum that more than likely will be run by volunteers, more than likely be funded by donations from the public or from those volunteers themselves. And they don't do it because, they don't do it to earn a wage. They do it because they're passionate about preserving the history of the place that they live and the fear of that disappearing. So, like, Gurdon, which is tiny. Gurdon's like maybe 300 people in Gurdon.
So where is Gurdon?
Gurdon is... Do you know where Inverbervie is?
Yeah.
Okay. But for people that don't know where Inverbervie is, it's between Stonehaven and Montrose on the northeast coast of Scotland. So there's a string of tiny villages that kind of cling to the shore. Inverbervie is a little bit inland. It's a bigger town. Gurdon's down on the shore, and it's sort of just along from Johnshaven. Tiny little village.
Yeah.
Just a harbour, and then 2 or 3 streets sort of set back into a steep hill. It has a maritime museum. It has a community-run maritime museum that's open, I think, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I didn't get a chance to go when I was last there, but that's the sort of organisation, that's the sort of people that maritime heritage in the UK wouldn't exist without.
Yeah, it's really being sustained by these people. So thank you to them.
Thank you to them.
To all of you, if you're listening.
That image we gave you at the start isn't representative of UK maritime heritage. It's a vibrant, beautiful melting pot of people that in the main have really good intention to preserve this history, this shared history. So if we want you to come away with something, that's sort of the message, I think. Yeah.
This image surprised us. That's why we wanted to talk a bit about what it is a reminder of and what is still very much here. And probably what we'll still see when we go to Arbroath Harbour in the next few days.
Yeah.